Megan Williams had always believed she knew who she was: a wife, a mother, a Canadian woman living a simple, ordinary life. She never questioned the path that had led her here. The career, the family, the friends. Everything was predictable. Everything was normal. But then one day it all changed. It wasn't a tragic event or a catastrophic loss. No, it was something much quieter, something that crept into her life when she least expected it. An old box of family photos. It sat in her attic, tucked away in a dusty corner. She hadn't thought about it in years, but there it was, calling to her. Megan pulled it down and opened it. As she sifted through the yellowed pages, her fingers brushed against a photo, one that stopped her in her tracks, a picture from her childhood. But something was off. The woman in the photo wasn't her mother. Megan stared at the image. The name written on the back of the photo was hers. But the woman in the image? She was certain it wasn't the woman who had raised her. Her heart raced. She had to know more. Why had this photo, this small, insignificant photo, been tucked away for so long? What did it mean? She thought she knew her past. But now that past was beginning to unravel. The mystery of who she really was began to unfold. And Megan's search for the truth would change her life forever. She didn't want to believe it, but there it was, proof of something she had never questioned, something she thought she had the answers to her whole life. Her identity was slipping through her fingers like sand, and she had no idea how to stop it. She took a deep breath, set the photo down, and began searching for answers. What started as a simple curiosity soon spiraled into something bigger. The photo, the name, the woman who wasn't her mother, all of it led her to one question. Who was she really? Megan thought it was a misunderstanding at first, just a mistake. Maybe it was a photo of someone else, but deep down, something gnawed at her. The more she looked into it, the more she investigated, the more questions arose. Her past, her identity, everything she thought she knew was a lie. She was no longer just Megan Williams, the Canadian wife and mother. She was someone else entirely. And the answers? They were scattered across 4 countries: Canada, the US, the UK, Australia. The further Megan dug, the more she realized her identity had been stolen, changed in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. And so her search began. What she didn't know as she stared at the photo in her hands was that this was just the beginning. The photo wasn't the end of her questions, it was just the first chapter. What Megan was about to uncover would take her to the darkest corners of her past and reveal a truth that would change everything. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know just how far this story is reaching. Megan sat there, staring at the photo for what felt like hours. She was caught between disbelief and an overwhelming sense of dread, like a deep pit opening up in her stomach, pulling her under. How could this be happening? She had grown up believing she was Megan Williams, a simple name, a simple life, a life she had built from the ground up. But now everything felt like it was crumbling. The woman in the photo was not her mother. Who was she really? The question echoed in her mind over and over. Her heart raced as she picked up the photo again, trying to convince herself that it was just some strange mistake. But the name written on the back, her name, was clear. And that was the moment she knew. The life she had lived, everything she had known, was built on a lie. It wasn't just the photo. It wasn't just the missing memories or the unsettling feeling of never truly belonging. No, this was something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored, something that would pull Megan into an investigation spanning 4 countries. She needed to know the truth. What started as a simple curiosity, a photo tucked away in an old box, soon spiraled into a search that would unravel every piece of Megan's identity. She couldn't turn back. She knew she had to find out who she was. The first step was obvious. She had to start asking questions. But to whom? Who could she trust with these strange revelations about her past? For years, she had accepted everything she had been told. Her parents, the ones who raised her, were the ones who had given her the answers. They told her who she was. They gave her the story of her life. But now that story was in pieces, scattered in front of her like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could this photo be a mistake? Could this simply be a misunderstanding? But deep down, she knew. She could feel it, the gnawing suspicion that something was very wrong. Her gut told her this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a slip of the tongue. Megan had to know more. So she did what anyone in her position would do. She started searching. And where did you begin when your entire life felt like a lie? She didn't have the answers, but she knew she had to start somewhere. She began by digging through old family records. Her parents had kept everything, and Megan thought she could find something that would clear up the confusion. But what she found only deepened the mystery. Her birth certificate, there was no record of it. No government records, no hospital documents. It was as if she had never been born. Megan's heart sank. How could that be? She couldn't fathom the implications. She turned to her parents, asking questions she had never asked before. Where was I born? Her father, usually so reassuring, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Her mother's response was a soft murmur, one she had never heard before. I, I don't know, honey. Why do you ask? That was the moment it hit her. They didn't know. They didn't know the truth either. Megan knew she couldn't stop there. The search would have to be bigger. There were too many gaps, too many missing pieces. And the more she searched, the more she uncovered. She turned to the only thing she could think of, the internet. She combed through old family websites, looking for anything that might explain her past. But there was no help there, just dead ends. So Megan expanded her search. She reached out to people she hadn't spoken to in years, old friends, distant relatives, even neighbors from her childhood. But the more she uncovered, the more questions arose. The deeper Megan dug, the more her entire world began to feel like a shattered mirror. Fragments of her past scattered across different countries and continents. There was no going back. This wasn't just about one small mistake anymore. This was about something much bigger, a truth buried so deep that it seemed almost impossible to uncover. As the days turned into weeks, Megan found herself researching countries she had never visited, searching for answers that crossed international borders. Canada, the US, the UK, Australia. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the truth was not confined to her small Canadian town. It stretched across the world, over oceans, through decades. Her search for answers had become a journey, one that would take her into the heart of the mystery she had always lived with. She was no longer just a woman asking questions about her identity. She was a woman uncovering the buried secrets of her past. But as the investigation continued, one fact stood out above all else. Megan's life, her entire identity, had been stolen from her. She wasn't the person she thought she was. She wasn't just Megan Williams. She had been someone else before. And her true name? It was hidden. For Megan, this discovery was a slap in the face, but it was only the beginning. The deeper she went, the more she understood that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was a crime that spanned across continents and decades, a crime that had stolen her childhood and erased her history. Megan felt herself on the edge. She couldn't turn back now. There was no going back to the life she had known. But she didn't have the full picture yet. She had uncovered so much, but she still didn't know the truth about who had taken her or why. Who was behind this? Who had stolen her identity? And why had they done it? Megan's mind raced as she began to realize that there were people, important people, who had been a part of this story all along. The questions swirled in her mind, each one more pressing than the last. Who was she really? And more importantly, who was responsible for the lie that had defined her life? The truth was out there, and Megan Williams was going to find it. Before I continue, I just want to take a moment to thank all of my amazing subscribers for supporting this channel and helping it grow. These true crime stories take a lot of time, research, and effort to produce, and your support keeps me going. If you found this journey so far intriguing and want to learn more about the truth behind this case, don't forget to like this video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already to keep receiving these intense, real-life mysteries. And if you think someone else would be captivated by this, share this story with them. They may need to hear this. Plus, turning on the notification bell will ensure you're the first to know when I upload more gripping cases like this one. Thank you again for your support. Let's keep going as we dig deeper into this story. It all began with a memory, one buried deep beneath the weight of a life lived in lies. It was 1983. Megan was just a young girl then, so full of life, her world still small, but bright and full of possibility. She had everything a child could wish for. Her home in Vancouver, Canada was like any other. The cozy house, the familiar scent of breakfast on a Sunday morning, the warmth of her parents' love. It felt safe. She felt loved. But there was always something missing, something that lingered in the quiet moments when Megan would find herself staring at the familiar walls of her room, wondering if there was something more. Her parents, though kind and loving, were often busy. Megan was the youngest of three, and with her siblings older and more independent, she often felt like the quiet observer in her own home. But life was good, simple. Then came Margaret. Margaret was a trusted family friend. Megan had known her for as long as she could remember. She was like an aunt, someone who would visit now and then, bringing stories of the world outside their small town. She had a laugh that could fill a room, and a smile that could light up even the darkest days. Megan's parents saw her as a friend, someone who had their best interests at heart. They trusted her. So when Margaret came to Megan's parents one day and offered to take Megan on a special trip to Disneyland in the United States, they didn't hesitate. It sounded like a dream. Disneyland. Who wouldn't want to go? It was the kind of opportunity Megan's parents could never afford to give her. Margaret promised she would treat Megan like her own. She promised Megan would have the time of her life, riding the roller coasters, meeting the characters, and coming home with stories to tell for years to come. It was a gift, a golden opportunity, and it wasn't something Megan's parents could say no to. Excited, Megan's parents agreed. They packed her bag and sent her off, thinking she'd return in a few days with stories of roller coasters and Disney princesses. But Margaret never returned Megan to her parents. As the days passed, Megan's parents grew increasingly concerned. Margaret had promised Megan would be home soon, but the days turned into weeks, and still, no sign of Megan. The phone calls went unanswered. The letters returned undelivered. And when Megan's parents finally tracked down Margaret, there was no reasonable explanation, just a vague excuse. "She's having the time of her life," Margaret said. "She's made so many new friends. Don't worry, she's safe." But Megan's parents didn't feel safe. They knew something wasn't right. As weeks turned into months, the weight of the unknown began to settle in their bones. Where was their little girl? Why wasn't she coming home? Megan's parents called the police, but the trail quickly turned cold. In those days, international communication was slow, disorganized, and filled with gaps. Megan could be anywhere by now. Megan's parents never stopped looking. They reached out to everyone who might know anything. Friends, family, even strangers who had passed through Margaret's life. But no one knew anything. No one had seen her. For years, the questions lingered. Where was their daughter? What had happened to her? Megan's life continued on, but not the way she thought it would. The time she had spent in Disneyland never happened. She never came back to her parents. Instead, she was taken, far away from everything she had ever known. Margaret, the trusted family friend, had carried out her plan to steal Megan away from the family that loved her. And Megan, too young to understand, was caught in the middle of it. She was no longer Megan Williams. Her identity had already begun to slip away, and she didn't even know it yet. Megan woke up one morning in a strange bed, in a strange house with unfamiliar faces around her. She was no longer in Canada. She was no longer with her family. She was in the United Kingdom. And Margaret, the woman who had promised her the world, was nowhere to be found. Megan was too young to grasp what was happening, but there was a feeling inside her that would stay with her forever. She didn't belong here. This wasn't home. Why hadn't her parents come for her? Why was she alone with strangers in a foreign country? And why, no matter how many times she asked, did Margaret always tell her the same thing? "You were unwanted, Megan. Your real parents didn't want you. We took you in because they couldn't be bothered." The words stung every time, but Megan believed them. She had no reason not to. She had nothing else to hold on to. As the years passed, the lie settled into Megan's heart like a weight she couldn't shake. She wasn't just living in a new country. She was living a new life. Her name had changed. Her birthday had been rewritten. And the person she thought was her mother, Margaret, was actually the woman who had stolen her life. Megan's world was not what she thought it was, but the feeling of not belonging only grew stronger. Every time she asked about her past, every time she mentioned her real parents, Margaret's answers never made sense. They didn't want you, Megan. We gave you a better life. Be grateful. And so, Megan buried the questions deep inside, pushing them away until they became a distant ache she couldn't reach. But as Megan grew older, the lies became harder to ignore. Something inside her shifted. She couldn't just accept it anymore. She needed to know the truth. Who was she? Why had her parents never come for her? Why had Margaret taken her in the first place? And why, after all these years, was she still being kept in the dark? Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had been told she was unwanted, abandoned, but deep down she knew that couldn't be true. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. Why didn't Margaret want her to know the truth? Why had her parents never come looking for her? Could it really have been that they had just forgotten her? No. The truth was somewhere out there, waiting to be uncovered, and Megan was going to find it. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized the truth was far darker than she could have imagined. What would she uncover when she finally found the answers? Megan didn't know, but she had to find out. Megan's life in Australia had always seemed normal, but normality can be deceiving. It was easy to think of her life as just another suburban story. A girl grows up, goes to school, makes friends, and builds a life. Megan was no different, except she wasn't truly Megan Williams. The woman she had believed was her mother. Margaret wasn't her mother at all. Margaret had taken Megan across borders, and the new life she created for her in Australia wasn't just a new address. It was a completely new identity, one that erased any trace of the girl Megan had been. The lie, so perfectly woven into the fabric of her childhood, was all Megan knew. In Australia, Megan was raised by Margaret and her husband. They told her she was their daughter, and for years Megan believed them. She attended school, made friends, and slowly became accustomed to her new surroundings. The Australian accent became her own. The strange but beautiful landscape of the sunburned country, the wide beaches, the eucalyptus trees, and the endless skies was now home. But something always nagged at Megan. It wasn't the big things. There were no glaring signs that her life was anything but ordinary. It was the small things. Why didn't she have any family photos from before Australia? Why didn't she have a real birth certificate or anything that tied her to her past? Why, every time she asked about her real family, did Margaret look at her with those eyes? Eyes that seemed to be hiding something? And most troubling of all, why did she feel like she didn't quite belong in the life Margaret had built for her? As the years passed, Megan's questions became harder to ignore. She could feel the weight of something missing in her life. There were too many gaps, too many places in her memories that didn't make sense. When she was young, she had a vivid dream about a house, one that seemed too familiar, too comforting. But when she asked Margaret about it, she was told it was just a figment of her imagination. But was it? It was the first sign of doubt, one that would eventually grow into a relentless search for answers. In her early teens, Megan began to push harder. Why did Margaret always change the subject when she asked about her birth parents? Why didn't she ever talk about Megan's early childhood? Margaret's answers were always the same. You were unwanted, Megan. Your parents didn't want you. We gave you a better life. But with every passing year, Megan felt the truth calling her. She wasn't sure how or when it would happen, but she knew. She had to know the truth about where she came from. The more Megan searched for answers, the more questions piled up. But it wasn't until a seemingly innocuous encounter that her life was truly changed. Megan had always known there was something different about her story, but it wasn't until she asked to see her birth certificate that everything came crashing down. She was applying for a job, and they required proof of her birth. Megan thought it would be a simple task. She had done it before. But this time, something felt wrong. When she asked Margaret for her birth certificate, she was met with hesitation. "It's in storage, darling. I'll get it for you later," Margaret said, brushing her off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Megan wasn't satisfied. The nagging feeling in her stomach wouldn't let her drop it. She asked again. Margaret's face tightened. "Why are you asking all these questions now? Just let it go." But Megan couldn't. She went to her parents' home, Margaret and her husband, and began rifling through boxes, through papers that had been buried away for decades. What she found wasn't what she expected. Instead of a birth certificate, she found an old travel document, something that shouldn't have been there. It was a passport, Margaret's passport, and that's when it clicked. Megan's heart raced. She wasn't born in Canada. She wasn't even born in the country she had always thought of as home. She was born in the UK. And that's when the lies started to unravel. The pieces were falling into place now. The passport wasn't just a random document. It was the key to everything Megan had been searching for. She was being deceived, betrayed by the one person she had trusted the most. Her birth name, her real name, wasn't Megan Williams. She had been taken from her family, her real family, when she was just a little girl. But why? Why would Margaret take her away from the life she had known? Why would she steal her identity and erase her past? Megan couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched through the pages, the documents, the old memories. But one thing was clear. Her entire life had been built on lies. She was not who she thought she was. Megan knew she couldn't stop here. She couldn't let this go. There was too much at stake. Her entire life was based on falsehoods. Her birth, her identity, was a mystery that she couldn't ignore any longer. She had to find out who was behind it. She had to know who had taken her away from her real family. And so, Megan embarked on a deeper investigation. She dug through more files, she contacted distant relatives, and she traced her biological roots as far back as she could. She reached out to the UK authorities, scouring through old public records, anything she could find that would tie her back to the truth. But the further she dug, the more the mystery deepened. Who was behind this? Who had taken her? And why had they done it? Just when Megan thought she had it all figured out, something shocking surfaced. A name. A name that made her blood run cold. Someone she knew. Someone she trusted. Someone who had been part of the conspiracy all along. But who? Who was the true mastermind behind the abduction? Megan's world spun out of control. The final piece was out there. But where? Could she truly uncover the truth, or would the lies consume her forever? The answers were closer than she realized, and they were about to change everything. Megan's life is starting to fall apart as she digs deeper into the truth. How would you feel if you discovered your entire identity had been fabricated by someone you trusted? What do you think is going to happen next in her search? Let me know your predictions. And again, tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious how far this story is spreading. I try to reply to as many comments as I can. As the years passed, Megan's life continued, but the questions that had begun to haunt her as a child only grew louder. She was now a young woman, late teens, early 20s, and everything about her life seemed so ordinary. She went to school, made friends, found a job, and settled into a routine. But despite everything seeming normal, there was a quiet dissonance in Megan's mind, an unease she couldn't shake. The life she had built was one she hadn't chosen, and the life she had been told was hers felt more and more like a story written by someone else. Every day, as she passed through the motions of living, a part of her felt out of place. It wasn't the world around her. It wasn't the people in her life. They were kind and loving, but there was always something missing. It was her past. Megan began to feel disconnected from everything that defined her. She had grown up with Margaret and her husband, believing them to be her parents. But as she looked back on her life, it became harder to ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The questions never went away. Why did she have no memories of her early childhood? Why didn't she have any family photographs from before her life in Australia? Why was it so difficult to get any straight answers when she asked about her birth parents? As a child, Megan's doubts had always been dismissed. She was told over and over again that her birth parents didn't want her, that they had given her away because they couldn't care for her. And she believed it. What else could she believe when the people raising her, the ones who had always been there, seemed so certain of it? But now, as a young adult, Megan began to feel the weight of those words differently. They no longer comforted her. They made her question everything. She didn't understand why she was so different from the other children in her class. She didn't understand why she didn't have the same sense of belonging as her friends did when they spoke of their families. She had no memory of being a child in Canada, no recollection of her parents, her siblings, her home. Why didn't she have any photos from before the age of 8? Why didn't she have any records? Birth certificates, medical history, family history. Everything about her past seemed forgotten. One day, while cleaning out an old cupboard in the family home, Megan stumbled across something she never expected to find. It was a piece of paper, folded, old, and hidden at the back of the shelf. At first, she thought it was just another old document, something that had been forgotten over the years. But when she unfolded it, her heart skipped a beat. It was a birth certificate, her birth certificate. Only it didn't match her name. Her name, the name she had lived with for so many years, was nowhere to be found. The name on the certificate was different. Megan's fingers trembled as she held the document. The weight of the discovery hit her all at once. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just an oversight. This was something deeper, something that couldn't be ignored. Her real name wasn't Megan Williams. She stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the document in her hands. Her mind raced. Why had Margaret never shown her this? Why had her parents, her adoptive parents, never told her? Megan was filled with a sense of betrayal, but also a crushing weight of confusion. She couldn't understand how this was possible. How could Margaret have kept this from her for so long? How could her entire life, her entire identity, be built on a lie? Megan felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. This wasn't just a name. This was everything. This was her. But as she stood there, her hands shaking, something else began to happen, something she hadn't expected. Suspicion started to take root. This wasn't a simple clerical error. This wasn't a mistake or a forgotten document. No, this was deliberate. Megan's instincts told her that she was on to something big, something that would answer the questions that had haunted her for so long. She needed to know more. She needed to find out who had done this and why. That night, Megan could barely sleep. The truth that had been kept from her for so long hung in the air like a storm ready to break. The next morning, she started digging deeper. She went through old records, searching for anything that might explain the discrepancy between the name on her birth certificate and the name she had always been told to use. She contacted distant relatives. She reached out to people who might have known something about her birth, about her true origins. But the more she searched, the more it seemed like everyone was in the dark. No one could provide any answers. Everyone she asked, friends, distant relatives, even her adoptive parents, were either confused or refused to talk about it. Megan began to feel isolated. This was her story, her life, but no one seemed to have any answers. Her investigation reached a breaking point when she found an old photo album in a box under the bed. The album, hidden away for years, was filled with images of a young Megan. Only these photos were different from the ones she had seen before. There were pictures of her as a toddler, laughing with her parents, but they weren't the parents she had known. The people in these photos, strangers to Megan, were her real parents. The truth hit her hard. Margaret had been lying to her all along. Her real family had been looking for her for years. But Margaret, this woman who had raised her, had never let her go. The pieces of Megan's life were beginning to come together, but they were not the pieces she wanted to find. The more she uncovered, the more the truth slipped through her fingers, just out of reach. Who had taken her? Who was behind the deception? And why had they kept her from her real family for so long? Megan's questions only grew louder. Every clue she uncovered seemed to lead to more questions, more uncertainty. The answers were close, but the truth, the one truth that could heal everything, was still hidden. Megan's search for the truth had become an obsession. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. The questions about her past were relentless. eating away at her every waking moment. What had Margaret done to her? Why had she lied? Who was she really? Megan had started to realize that the answers weren't just going to fall into her lap. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. No, this was much bigger. Her entire life had been stolen from her. But the deeper she dug, the more terrifying the truth became. She couldn't do it alone anymore. Megan needed help. So Mara, she reached out to Claire, her best friend since childhood. Claire had always been there for her, through thick and thin. Claire was the first person Megan ever confided in about the strange doubts she had, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Now Claire was the one person she could trust to help her make sense of it all. Together, they set off on a journey that would take them into the very heart of Megan's past. The first step was to go through every piece of paperwork, every file that Megan could find. Birth certificates, adoption papers, and travel documents. Nothing was off limits. They went through old family albums, even digging into dusty boxes stored away in attics and basements. Megan was determined to leave no stone unturned. As they sifted through documents and made phone calls, one thing became clear. There were gaps in Megan's life story. Large, unexplainable gaps. Megan had always been told that Margaret was a family friend, someone who had stepped in when her biological parents couldn't care for her. But now those words rang hollow. Claire dug through public archives and social media. Megan's face was everywhere. Photos from her childhood, records of her time in Australia, even a few posts from long-lost relatives who had been looking for her for years. It was when Claire found something on an old social media site, a post from a family friend in the UK, that the pieces began to fall into place. There was a comment, a brief line that stopped them both cold. "I hope they found her by now." Those words, so simple, so innocent. But for Megan, they were like a lightning bolt. What did they mean? Why was someone from the UK talking about her? The search became more intense. Megan's gut told her she was on the verge of something huge. Every new document, every new lead felt like it was bringing her closer to the truth. They found more evidence that didn't match the story Megan had been told. A passport, Margaret's, showed travel details that weren't part of the narrative. An adoption certificate with names that didn't fit. The woman she had always called mother, the one who had raised her, loved her, was a stranger to the story of Megan's life. The breakthrough came when they found a record in a government archive that made Megan's blood run cold. It was a missing persons report, filed in the UK more than 30 years ago. The name on the report? Megan Williams. But it wasn't just her name. It was a version of her name from before her life in Australia. It was the name she had lost. It was the name that had been erased. Her real name. And the report wasn't just a routine missing persons case. It was the same date Megan had been taken from her real parents, taken by Margaret. Megan's heart raced as she read the file, her hands shaking with disbelief. It was there, in black and white, the truth she had spent years trying to uncover. Margaret, her mother, was involved in the abduction. The woman Megan had trusted with her life was the one who had stolen it. But that was just the beginning. The next moment would turn everything Megan thought she knew upside down. Claire found a detail buried deep within the documents that made everything even more complicated. It wasn't just Margaret who had been involved in Megan's disappearance. There was another person, someone close to her, someone who had been in her life for years. And this person wasn't just an accomplice. They were the one who had orchestrated the entire thing. Megan's breath caught in her throat. It was someone she knew, someone she had trusted, someone who had been in her life since the very beginning. This person had manipulated Margaret into carrying out the abduction. They had played the part of a concerned relative, someone who had Megan's best interests at heart. But in reality, they were the one who had masterminded the plan. Megan felt her mind begin to spin. She couldn't wrap her head around it. How could she not have seen it before? She had trusted this person. They had been part of her life. And now Megan realized they had lied to her for years. But why? Why would they do this to her? What had they gained by stealing her life and erasing her past? Megan had thought the truth was already shocking enough. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The more she uncovered, the more twisted the story became. The person who had taken her was someone who had always been there, always been close, someone she had never suspected. The questions only multiplied. Who could have possibly been behind this? What had they wanted from her? But the answers were closer than she realized. Megan had already uncovered the lies. She had found the truth in fragments, half of it in her hands, half still out of reach. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that would make everything clear, was still hidden. And Megan knew that finding it would change everything. But would it be enough to heal the wounds of her stolen life? Who would she have to face to finally uncover the whole truth? The final chapter was about to be written. But would Megan be ready for what she was about to discover? This twist is mind-blowing, right? Do you think the person behind Megan's abduction was hiding in plain sight all along? Who would you have suspected? Let's hear your thoughts. Who do you think was the real mastermind? I'll read every comment and reply to the most interesting theories. Megan sat still, the documents scattered across the table in front of her. The overwhelming weight of her discoveries made her head spin, each new piece of information adding another layer to the web of lies she had lived through. But despite the progress, despite the discoveries, there was still something missing. The truth was close, so close, yet Megan felt like she was running out of time. Every new detail she uncovered only deepened the mystery, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't quite put it all together. And then came Claire, her best friend, her partner in this dark, twisted search, had uncovered something that would shatter everything Megan thought she knew. It was a letter, a simple letter that, on the surface, seemed inconsequential. But when Claire handed it to Megan, everything changed. The letter, hidden deep within an old storage box, was written in a neat, familiar hand. At first glance, it appeared to be a letter from one of Megan's distant relatives, someone who had been part of her life when she was a child. But when Megan read the words, she froze. The letter revealed something that immediately made her blood run cold. It wasn't just Margaret who had been involved in her abduction. No. This letter suggested another person, someone much closer to Megan, someone who had been in her life from the very beginning, someone she never thought would play a part in this horrifying truth. This person had been the mastermind all along. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as she reread the letter, each word hitting her harder than the last. She felt like the ground was slipping from beneath her. The letter wasn't just an innocent note. It wasn't just a letter from a distant relative. It was a confession. The words in the letter made it clear. Someone close to her family had orchestrated the entire plan. They had been involved in the deception, helping Margaret carry out the abduction, and that person wasn't a stranger. That person was someone Megan knew very well. Megan's mind raced as she tried to process what she was reading. Her thoughts felt jumbled, her body frozen in disbelief. This wasn't just a random act of crime. It wasn't just a family friend acting alone. This person had been in her life, her real family's life, for years. Megan stared at the letter, trying to make sense of it, but the truth was harder to swallow than she ever imagined. Her mind raced through the people who had been close to her, who had been around her growing up. And then it hit her. This person who had orchestrated the entire abduction, was someone Megan would never have suspected. Someone who had always been in the background, always playing the role of the concerned relative, the helpful family member. But behind the scenes, this person had been working with Margaret, helping her steal Megan away from her real family. The revelation made Megan's stomach churn. She had trusted this person. She had looked up to them. She had never once considered the possibility that they were capable of something like this. The psychological toll of this discovery was immeasurable. Megan had already been dealing with the emotional weight of realizing her life had been stolen from her. But now this twist, this revelation, made it even worse. The person who had been closest to her, someone she had trusted and loved, was behind the conspiracy that had defined her entire existence. The betrayal was suffocating. How could this person have done this? How could they have been so cold, so calculating, that they had kept the truth hidden for so many years? Megan couldn't reconcile the person she thought she knew with the one who had orchestrated her abduction. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Megan could feel her world beginning to tilt. The letter wasn't just a clue, it was the game changer. This was the moment where everything she had thought she knew about her life, her identity, and her family was thrown into question. This person, who had always been a part of her life, had been working in the shadows, manipulating her, controlling her reality. But why? Why had they done this? What had they gained by taking her away from everything she knew, erasing her past and forcing her to live a lie? Megan knew she needed to confront this person. She needed answers. But confronting them meant opening up old wounds, possibly exposing a deeper darkness in her past that she wasn't ready to face. Megan and Claire worked tirelessly, trying to track down the person who had been involved. They searched through every possible lead, every connection they could find. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous this search seemed to become. Megan felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into the unknown. The truth was out there, but the closer she got, the more it felt like she was being pulled deeper into something that could destroy everything she had left. She wasn't just searching for the person who had taken her. She was searching for the core of the deception, the heart of the lie that had controlled her life for so long. The emotional toll of it all weighed heavily on her. She was beginning to realize that finding the truth might cost her more than she was ready to lose. Just when Megan thought she was on the brink of understanding it all, just when the truth seemed within reach, another layer of the mystery unfolded. There was more to this than she realized. The person who had been behind it all wasn't just the puppet master. There was someone else pulling the strings. Someone who had been watching from the shadows, orchestrating events from afar. Who were they? And what had they gained from Megan's stolen life? Megan's stomach churned with the thought. The final pieces of her life were within her grasp. But could she handle the full truth? Megan felt like the world was spinning out of control. The truth was coming at her in waves, each revelation more painful than the last. She had spent so many years, decades really, living a life that was not hers. A life built on lies, on deception, on the manipulation of those she had trusted most. But the deepest cut, the one that Megan hadn't prepared for, was the discovery that her real family, her true family, had never stopped looking for her. For 50 years, they had been searching for her, and Megan had no idea. The moment Megan found out, it felt like the ground beneath her feet had cracked open. The truth, when it finally hit, was crushing. Her real family, the family she had never known, had been searching for her all these years. They had never given up, not for a single moment. Megan's heart sank as she imagined what they must have gone through, how they must have felt, wondering where she was, why she was taken, and why they were never able to bring her home. For the first time, Megan understood the depth of the pain her real parents must have felt, the questions that must have haunted them for years. What had happened to their little girl? Why hadn't they been able to find her? And now here she was, a stranger to them, with nothing but fragments of their love and their grief stretching across time. Megan was overwhelmed with guilt. She had believed for so long that she had been abandoned. She had been told that her real parents didn't want her, that they had given her away without a second thought, and she had accepted it. But now she learned that the reality was something far worse. Her parents hadn't abandoned her. They had been torn apart by her disappearance. Her real family had been desperately searching for her, never once giving up hope. But Megan, she had spent her life believing the lie that she was unwanted. All these years, she had carried the weight of that belief, burdened by the thought that no one had ever wanted her. Megan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness as she processed this revelation. She had spent so much of her life thinking she was unwanted, unworthy of love, but her real family had been looking for her, praying for her return. They had never stopped hoping, and here she was, a grown woman, finally understanding what it felt like to be loved by people who had never given up on her. It was a bittersweet feeling. Her heart ached as she thought about the years lost, the years she could have spent with them, the years they had spent without her. What would her life have been like if she had never been taken, if she had been allowed to grow up with her real family? The questions flooded her mind, and the weight of the lost time was unbearable. But there was more. There was something else. something that hurt even more than the knowledge of the years stolen from her life. It was the realization that she could never get those years back. Megan sat in silence, her mind racing with the truth. Her thoughts were chaotic, jumbled, tangled, and full of regret. She thought about her own children, how they had grown up with her, how they had loved her unconditionally. She had built a family of her own, but even now she wondered what it would have been like to be raised by the family she had lost. Her siblings, her real siblings, had spent decades wondering what had happened to her. They had lived their lives without knowing where she was, or even if she was alive. For them, every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering had been shadowed by her absence. And Megan? She had never known. The emotional stakes were growing higher with every passing minute. Megan felt herself slipping into the depths of guilt, torn between her past and the present. She had built a life, a family, and a sense of belonging, but now it felt as though that life was built on a false foundation. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her identity, was in question. Megan had always wondered where she came from, who she really was, but now she understood that it wasn't just about her. It was about her real family, the family who had never stopped looking for her, who had never let go of the hope that one day they would find her again. But with this knowledge came pain. Megan couldn't undo the years she had lost. She couldn't erase the suffering her real family had endured. She couldn't go back in time and change the past. The guilt pressed down on her like a heavy weight, making it hard to breathe. She felt like a stranger in her own life. And yet, as she stood on the precipice of this painful realization, something else began to surface. Her real family wasn't just a lost dream. They were alive. They were out there, waiting for her. Megan had been given a second chance. But what did that mean for her? Could she embrace this new family? Could she step into the life that had been stolen from her all those years ago? Or would she forever be defined by the life Margaret had created for her? Megan knew there was no easy answer. There were too many layers of pain, too many years of regret. But one thing was clear. Her real family had never given up on her. And now Megan had to decide whether she would return to them, or if she would continue living the life that had been forced upon her. The truth was right in front of her. The answers were there, just within reach. But Megan had to decide. Could she step into the world she had lost? Could she find the courage to face her real family and the years that had passed in silence? And what would it mean to finally be part of the family she had been separated from all those years ago? Megan's heart raced as she realized that she was standing on the edge of a decision that would shape the rest of her life. But would she take the first step, or would the past hold her captive forever? The next chapter of Megan's story was about to begin. But what would it look like? Okay, this is getting wild, isn't it? How did you react when you found out who was really behind Megan's abduction? Were you shocked, or did you see it coming? Drop your thoughts below. Do you think the full truth is still out there? Also, where are you watching from? I love hearing from all over the world. I make sure to reply to as many comments as I can. Megan could barely keep her thoughts straight as she sat in the waiting area of the airport, staring at the departure board. The noise around her, the hum of the overhead announcements, the distant chatter of travelers, the hurried footsteps of strangers, was drowned out by the pounding of her own heart. The past few weeks had been a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and messages. Each day had brought Megan closer to this moment. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the weight of what was about to happen. She was finally going to meet her real family. It had been more than 50 years since she had been taken. More than 5 decades since she was stolen from the people who had loved her. For most of her life, she had believed she was unwanted. Now she was about to discover just how wrong that belief had been. She had spent years chasing ghosts, searching for the truth about who she really was. Every lead, every document, every tear-filled conversation had brought her closer to this single moment, the moment when she would finally come face to face with her past. But even with all the answers, nothing could prepare her for the flood of emotions she was about to experience. Megan's flight was long, but time had no meaning in that moment. As the plane crossed the miles taking her from Australia to the UK, her mind raced. She thought about her siblings, her real siblings, the ones she had never known, but who had been waiting for her. What would they be like? Would they look like her? Would they share her laugh? Megan's mind spun with questions. But more than anything, she felt an overwhelming sense of grief for the years lost, for the family moments that would never be hers. It wasn't just a reunion, it was the final act in a story that had been written without her for too long. When the plane touched down in London, Megan felt like her heart was caught in her throat. She had waited for this moment her entire life, and now, standing in the bustling airport terminal, it felt like everything had led to this. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was finally here, she didn't know what to feel. Her hands trembled as she clutched her suitcase, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of the people she had never met but had always known. She stepped out into the arrival hall, taking in the sights and sounds of the busy airport. People rushed past her, faces blurred by her own racing thoughts. And then she saw them, her siblings. They were standing at the edge of the crowd, holding a faded photo. A photo of Megan as a child, her innocent face beaming up from the photograph, a memory of the little girl who had been taken all those years ago. It was her face, the same face she had seen in the mirror for decades. But now, standing here, it felt like she was looking at a stranger. Her eyes locked onto theirs, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The noise of the airport, the blur of strangers, none of it mattered. All that mattered was them. As soon as they saw her, they moved toward her, faster than Megan could react. They were all taller than her, but in that moment, they seemed to shrink away. Two women and a man, each with tears in their eyes, rushed toward her, the photo still clutched in their hands. Megan's breath caught in her chest. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. And then they were there. They wrapped their arms around her, pulling her close in a tight embrace. For the first time in her life, Megan felt like she belonged. The floodgates opened. Tears filled her eyes, her throat tightening with emotion she couldn't put into words. She had never known what it was like to be truly wanted, truly loved until this moment. Her real family, her true family, held her like they would never let go. And in that moment, Megan realized something. They had never stopped looking for her. They had never forgotten her. Megan felt the years of pain, the years of confusion, and the years of heartache wash over her in a rush. She had spent so much of her life carrying the weight of the belief that she was unwanted. But now, standing there in their arms, she felt something else. She felt whole. The pain of all the lost years, the birthdays, the holidays, the milestones, still lingered, but it was tempered by something much stronger. Love. Her siblings spoke through tears, their words muffled by emotion. "We've missed you so much, Megan," one of her sisters whispered, her voice trembling. The man who she would later learn was her older brother simply shook his head in disbelief. "We never gave up," he said, his voice breaking. Megan's heart swelled with emotion as she looked into their faces. Their eyes that looked so much like hers, were filled with the same sorrow and joy. They had spent years wondering what happened to her. They had never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. And now, finally, she was home. As they led Megan to a nearby bench, the siblings began to fill in the gaps. They told her about their lives, the years they had spent without her, the celebrations she had missed, the heartache they had endured. They spoke of their parents, her real parents, who had never stopped looking for her, who had never stopped hoping that one day Megan would come back to them. Megan listened, feeling both overwhelmed and comforted. She had so many questions. She wanted to know everything. What was it like without her? What had happened to them in the years since she had been taken? But as she listened to their stories, one thing became clear. Her real family had never stopped loving her. As Megan sat with her siblings, hearing their stories and learning about the years they had spent without her, something shifted in her. The guilt she had carried for so long began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. Her real family had always been there. They had never given up. And now, Megan was finally home. But there was still pain. There were still years to be reckoned with. But as she sat there surrounded by the family who had never stopped searching for her, Megan realized that she didn't need to go back and undo the years she had lost. What mattered now was the love that surrounded her. Megan knew this was just the beginning. The reunion, this moment, was the emotional payoff she had been waiting for. But there were still so many unanswered questions. How would her real parents feel when they saw her? What would happen next? And how would Megan move forward? Knowing the life she had lived was not the one she had chosen. Her journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The next step in Megan's journey, toward healing, toward understanding, toward truly belonging, was waiting for her. But would she be ready for what came next? Megan sat quietly, gazing out at the quiet street from the window of her new home. It was peaceful here, different from the chaotic, restless search for answers that had consumed her for so long. She had spent years chasing the truth, digging through the ashes of her past, trying to piece together the fragments of a life that had been stolen from her. And now, as she sat in this quiet, peaceful space, Megan felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came easily, nor the kind that arrived all at once. It was the peace that came with knowing the truth. Megan's journey had been long, full of pain, confusion, and heartache. It had taken her from the quiet streets of Vancouver to the unknown corners of the world, searching for answers that seemed just beyond reach. But now she knew who she was. She knew where she came from. For so long, Megan had believed she was unwanted, abandoned, a lost soul drifting through a world that didn't understand her. She had been told lies about her past, lies that shaped the very core of her identity. But the truth, when it finally came, was different from anything she had expected. It wasn't just about finding her real family, her real identity. It was about healing. Megan had spent so much of her life longing for a connection, a sense of belonging that she could never find. The people who had raised her, Margaret and her husband, had been the only parents she knew. They had told her that her real family had abandoned her, but the truth was far darker than that. Her real family, the ones she had been torn from all those years ago, had never stopped looking for her. And that truth was more than just the reunion. It was the understanding that love had never left her. Her siblings had searched for her, hoped for her return, and now they were reunited. But there was still so much for Megan to learn, so much healing still to come. Her past had been stolen, but it wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The first time Megan looked into her siblings' eyes, her real siblings, she felt the weight of everything she had lost. But more than that, she felt the love, the unspoken bond that had never disappeared, even though she had been gone for so long. The healing didn't come overnight. It took time, more time than Megan had ever imagined. But with each passing day, the scars from her stolen life began to fade. Megan wasn't just rediscovering her past, she was rebuilding it. She was learning how to live with the pain, how to accept the years lost, and how to embrace the love that was now available to her. She knew she could never get back the childhood that had been stolen, but in the embrace of her real family, Megan found something she had never known she needed: closure. It wasn't a perfect ending, and Megan knew that. She couldn't erase the years spent in the dark, trapped in the lie Margaret had created for her. But now, standing alongside her family, her real family, Megan could breathe easier. She no longer had to wonder who she was or where she came from. She no longer had to search for answers in the dark. Her identity was no longer a puzzle. It was a story, her story, a story of rediscovery, a story of family, a story of healing. Megan had found herself, and in doing so, she had found a family that had been waiting for her, loving her, even when she didn't know they existed. As Megan sat in the quiet room, listening to the laughter of her siblings as they shared stories of their childhood, stories she had never known, it hit her. She had missed so much. But in the midst of all the grief, the sadness, and the loss, there was something far stronger: love. Her family's love for her had never wavered. And now she understood. She understood that even though the years were gone, the love never left. That was the part of the story that mattered the most. Megan's journey wasn't just about finding her identity. It was about rediscovering her family, reconnecting with the people who had never stopped loving her, and healing the wounds that had been left open for so long. Megan walked through the door of her new home, her heart light. There was a future ahead of her, a future filled with people who had waited for her, a future where the scars of the past could finally begin to heal. Her children ran to greet her, their arms wide open, their love unconditional. And for the first time, Megan felt it. She felt like she had come home. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that was hers to shape. And in this new chapter of her life, Megan had one thing above all else: the love of her real family who had never given up on her. But even as Megan felt the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders, she knew there was still more to her story. There were still questions that needed answers. There were still wounds to be healed. The future wasn't perfect, but it was hers. What would Megan's next chapter look like? How would she move forward from here? And most importantly, how would she navigate this new life with the love of a family that had never given up on her? Her journey was far from over, but the first steps toward healing had already been taken. I want to pause for a moment to express my sincere gratitude to all of you, my loyal subscribers, for your continued support. These stories are no easy feat to produce, but with your help, we're able to bring them to life and share these important narratives with the world. If this story touched you, gave you chills, or opened your eyes to a truth you never knew, please like this video. Your support means the world, and it helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe if you're not already part of our community. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who still believes that hope can survive, no matter how dark the past may be. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when I drop another incredible story like this one. If you want more solved cold cases like this, check out the previous video. You won't want to miss it. Once again, thank you for being here, and thank you for helping these stories reach the hearts they need to. Let's keep searching for the truth together.